lot of action in Brewers camp this week, and we're here to break it all down for you. I'm down in Phoenix right now, covering on site for the final week and a half of spring training here. Spencer's not. He's on the left side of my screen here back home in Milwaukee, but I'm sure he still has plenty of insightful analysis to go along with some of the news we have to talk about. It's the Brewer Fanatic podcast, spring training edition, the final spring training edition that we'll have, because at this time next week, it'll be opening day. Opening day is on Thursday next week. And the main thing we're going to talk about this week is just a lot of stuff going on as far as the outlook and the shape that this opening day Brewers roster was going to take. A lot of things changing within 1 week. Of course, when I get down here, that's when all the chaos begins, because I'm just a magnet for chaos, as you know, Spencer. But by the end of the week, and especially probably by the time you're listening to this or over the weekend for sure, we're really going to start to have a lot more clarity on how things are going to look. And we'll talk about that kind of as we get there. But before we jump in, Spencer, how are things in Wisconsin? I understand that the weather's been a little bit inconsistent this week.
That's a very nice way to put it. Yes, it has been inconsistent to say the least. Of course, it was pretty nice when we were down in Florida, so I missed the nice weather in Milwaukee, make my way back. Not nice weather at all. We've had to deal with some of the scheduling issues for our college baseball team, but a lot of things going on. Very busy, not great weather. I'm sure you're enjoying your life a lot more than I am this week, but I'm still very happy to talk Brewers baseball, and I'm very happy. To be completely honest with you, I've been so busy and I've had so much stuff going on. It didn't really register with me that it was only a week until opening day until you just said that. So now I'm happy. Now I'm excited for that. And the Badgers won their March Madness game today. So that was a good start to my day. But overall, things have been good. Weather not great, but overall fine. Jack, I'm sure you're enjoying life a lot more though. So how have you been?
A little bit tired, but tired for a good reason. Enjoying the grind, so to speak. Today was an off day though in camp, which is probably something that I really needed coming off of our college trip. That's a draining week with basically no downtime, very little sleep. Then to go from that and jump on 2 flights, I had a connecting flight to get to Phoenix because they don't fly direct west out of Fort Myers. So 2 flights, getting in late at night, waking up early right away the next morning for Clubhouse, and just kind of rolling ever since. But after today, hopefully get a little bit more pep back in my step. But at the same time, it's baseball. I can do baseball on low sleep and still have a decent amount of energy. So enjoying my time down here so far. The weather's actually been pretty mild, which is how I would like it when I'm down in Phoenix. But it's supposed to warm up here as we roll into the weekend. But certainly can't complain about my status right now, especially with the way things seem to be up north at the moment. But without further ado, let's jump into some of the news that we have to cover this week. And we'll start with really the big headline, the big story from the past week was Brandon Woodruff back on a big league mound for the first time in 18 months. He and Jose Quintana making their spring training debuts for the Brewers. But we'll really talk about Woodruff here for a few minutes first, because this is the big one. Before we jump into it, I'll preface this right away by saying that we were both very wrong about how he was going to look once he got back onto a mound this spring. And that's a good thing. I like being wrong when my opinion or my educated guess was a little bit more on the pessimistic side. I thought I was being realistic, but it was a little pessimistic compared to what a lot of people, were trying to get their hopes up regarding how Brandon Woodruff was going to look. So in his first outing of spring training, we had already seen like a very encouraging velocity readings, and he was on the stadium gun. I just had like a spreadsheet up as he was pitching, just I marked down like his pitch types, his velos, outcomes, just to have some preliminary metrics in case, I wanted to use them, or if there was anything noteworthy worth sharing, which usually there's not in one inning of work. Usually it's just the velo and the average velocity for him on his 2 fastballs. He was mixing both of them, the 4-seam and the sinker. Average fastball velocity, 93.1 miles an hour for Brandon Woodruff in his 1 inning of work, and he hit 95 twice, including with his final pitch of the inning. Now, I'm sure some of that it was definitely adrenaline-based or assisted by adrenaline, so I wouldn't be shocked if when he goes out for his second spring training appearance, if the velocity maybe goes back down a tick. But the fact that he has this in him at this stage, coming off of what he's coming off of, is really nothing short of remarkable. Like, I'm blown away that this is where he's sitting right now. And even that 93.1 average is a little bit deceptive because he was like 91, 92 within like the first 5 pitches of the inning or so. And then after that, he pretty much cranked it up to like 92 to 94 for the rest of the inning while touching those 95s. So I said this to you. I actually sent you a text like right away as he was pitching. I was like, holy smokes, dude. Like, the velocity is fine. It's not, not super close to where it was at his peak. At his peak, he was averaging like 96, and here it was 93, but that's still a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. We saw 95, but also the secondaries look really good. And we'll talk about that kind of as we get a little more into what he's working on. I talked to him about some of this stuff in the clubhouse after that start the next morning, just kind of getting some more details on some of this. But the changeups are really good. He got 2 whiffs on changeups. He mixed in both breaking balls. Really, there's just kind of one holdup right now, and we'll get to that in a minute. But right now, just in terms of how the baseball is coming out of his hand, it's not 100% the Brandon Woodruff we remember, but the velocity is close, and the shapes of the secondaries look really good. And this is, like I said, not at all what I was expecting. I still thought that, coming in, we'd probably see him more in like the, maybe scraping 90, maybe dialing it up to 92 or something like that. This has blown me away compared to what I was expecting. I'm guessing the Brewers probably internally knew something that we didn't. We had fielded a lot of questions as we were talking about Brandon Woodruff about, okay, well, why did the Brewers bring him back if this is kind of what you were looking at? So perhaps they did. Maybe they were expecting at least some of this. Pat Murphy made it sound like, though, he's way ahead of even what Murphy was expecting too at this point. But just in terms of the velo and the command is another part of this too. I don't think he was especially sharp command-wise in that inning, which I wouldn't expect that anyway. I think just the fact that we're seeing 93 with good secondary shapes is already, like I said, kind of blowing away what both of our expectations were.
Yeah, I can't really wipe the smile off my face whenever I think or talk about Woodruff right now, just because, for one, he seems so happy talking right now. Like, you can tell he's feeling good right now, and just hearing him talk a little bit, he got a little emotional talking about how it's been 18 months since he was on a mound playing in a real, it's a spring training game, but it's a major league game. And just hearing him talk about it and seeing the ball coming out of his hands, like you said, I mean, wow, I was not expecting it at all. I know we had heard he had touched 94 in the minor league game, so we knew that there was more velo than we had expected even going into spring. But just averaging 93, and like you said, with kind of a slow start in terms of the velo in that inning, and touching 95 multiple times, and more than anything, like you said, I couldn't believe how good his secondaries looked. I talked about, when we talked about him a lot during the offseason, I always came back to the fact that I thought he'd be someone who could make it work, even if the stuff was diminished to an extent. Like, he's got that bulldog in him. He's got that type of like mentality where he's like, I'm just going to find a way to get outs. And I thought that might take a while to get to, but I thought he was going to get there eventually, even if maybe the stuff was diminished. It still might not get back to the point that we have seen it in the past, but I have a lot more hope that it will now than I did going into spring, for sure. I see it as a possibility now, whereas I honestly didn't really think it was going to happen prior to spring. Now I could see it happening. But even beyond that, I think just the fact that when I look back on how I was talking about all of this, I kept mentioning how, like, I thought he was a guy who just makes something work. I probably should have factored that into his rehab and everything else. Like, this is a guy who's going to attack it at 100% and do all these things to try and get back to where he is. And I think he probably did that. I mean, even if you just look at him, you can kind of see Woodruff looks like he's in a little bit better shape than he was before the injury. I think he's just in a really good place. Obviously, he's attacked it really, really hard. I don't know, man. I'm very happy. Every time I've seen anything from him this spring, it's just put a smile on my face. And yeah, I still don't want to get crazy cart before the horse here and start talking about expectations for the season too much, but my hope for the season for him this year now is a lot higher than it was pre-spring training. Like, I actually do think there's a a path to not just, like we said, a great season in our eyes before was kind of like 100 innings, 4 ERA. I still don't think that would be a bad season, but I kind of see a path to, I could see him being better than that. If he gets to 100 innings, I could see him having a little bit better of a season than even what I thought would be like a really, really successful season before. Yeah, it's very cool to see. I don't know him personally, obviously, but like he just seems like somebody who everyone wants to root for, and Brewer fans obviously do. That's why everyone's been so excited about him all offseason. You really hope this works out, and I mean, it feels like the odds have gone up every single day. Every time he's gone out there for any outing, it's been all good news, and that's awesome.
Well, this is where we get to the part where I'm going to say, okay, here's where we pump the brakes a little bit still.
Yep.
What Pat Murphy cautioned about before he took the mound that day was it's not just about the velo, it's about the actual pitch shapes. Like, how is he spinning the ball? How's it moving? Does it have life coming out of his hand? Things like that, which wasn't really surprising for me to hear. But as soon as I did hear that, my mind immediately went back to, is this going to be kind of similar to what Jimmy Nelson dealt with? When Jimmy Nelson came back from shoulder surgery, his four-seam shape changed pretty dramatically. He used to be a guy who could get a little bit more run on his four-seamer, a little bit of lift too. And when he came back, he was cutting it. He eventually was able to kind of work around that by adding more of like a seam-shifted sinker that he was able to throw, and that's how he got the run back. But it wasn't the same kind of fastball mix that he had before. And we did find out pretty quickly that's basically what's happened to Woodruff too. His four-seamer's cutting now since he's come back. And we both noticed it right away, like watching from the TV angle. I asked him about it right away in the clubhouse after he was done pitching, and right away he's like, yep, that's the thing right now. That's not really where we want it to be. He said, I can learn to pitch with the cut if that's where it ends up. He said, it's not necessarily a bad thing because I could figure out how to use it. He said, but I'd rather get back to having the fastball that I normally have. And he said that what's going on here, it's really just an inconsistent lower body thing. So his lower body mechanics aren't feeling the most consistent right now. And that's obviously going to have an impact on your arm, kind of how you're coming through, how you're releasing the ball. And he said, I've been more of a natural pronator my entire life. So I'm not really used to having this happen. I'm still kind of trying to figure out how do I get it back to where it needs to be. But that's like the one area where I'm going to say pump the brakes right now, because, if he is throwing 90, let's say when he comes back to the big leagues, let's say as a starter, if he's sitting like 92 and touching 95, like sitting 92, 93, maybe 94, touching 95, and that's a fastball that is either like really straight or like a slight amount of cut and not as much lift as he used to have. Like that's not a very good four-seam fastball anymore compared to what used to be a fantastic four-seam fastball. And it's really not the velocity so much as it is the shape. So like it is important that he gets that back. That is a big deal. Like he said, you can learn to pitch with that. My guess is if that's where it's sitting now, he's going to have to go a lot more heavy two-seamer, which again is not ideal for him. He's probably going to have to rely on the secondaries a little more. Like things are going to have to be different. So that is something worth watching right now. I think we've learned at this point you can't really count him out on anything, so maybe he's able to fix it. But I do think that is something very, very important to keep an eye on. It's certainly something that he's focused on. It'll be nice, too, especially once he starts pitching in some rehab outings, presumably in AAA, where you're going to get like StatCast data for his games. Then we're really going to be able to monitor a lot of the shape stuff, because that is going to be a very big part of how everything plays, probably even a little bit more than the velocity. So the fact that he's cutting the ball right now, it is a big deal, and it is a big thing to have some pause about. But there's also the rest of the arsenal as well. Two-seamer still had some run on it. And I want to get to the breaking stuff here. Curveball still looks good. He's also working on making that slider better right now. And this is what I kind of followed up with him about. What he said to me the day after he pitched was he's wanted to add, not so much go as far as make it like a full-blown big sweeper, but he's wanted to add a lot more lateral movement to his slider for quite some time now. He's always thrown more of like a really short gyro slider, which is fine. It's been a perfectly solid pitch for him, but the issue is his curveball is basically a 12-6 curve. It's like straight down, top to bottom. And when you're throwing like a gyro slider, there's very little movement on that pitch. It's more about like just a little bit of late break right at the very end with that football spin. You can get some bad swings with it. But in his mind, and he's right about this, it's too close to what his curveball already does. In a lot of ways, it's like a harder curveball with a lot less movement. Really, if you look at his pitch movement plot, and this has never been a subject of discussion because he's always been so effective, but if you look at his pitch movement plot, there's like nothing going to the glove side because that slider doesn't really go to the glove side much. It's all either arm side with the sinker, lift with the four-seamer, and then mostly just downward break to varying degrees with both the curveball and that short gyro slider. So he wants to add more lateral movement to that pitch to kind of just balance things out a little more, gives him something with a little more separation off the curveball, something that can actually break away from a right-handed batter. And it looks pretty good right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and even before he said that he was working on this, if you just the first one I saw was on the TV replay, and it was like perfect timing because the TV angle on that slider he threw was the plate angle behind the plate, which is really where you want to be if you're looking at pitch movement. And I saw him rip off that slider. And I'm like, I've never seen the ball move that much in that direction coming out of his hand. Like it had quite a bit of lateral movement, not like his normal slider does. So if he's throwing the ball like that, that's also something you need to take into account too, because, if he's got a better slider now, I think that also probably means that two-seamers are going to play a little bit better too, because now he's got the ability to work kind of in and out east-west a little more if the north-south thing isn't quite what it used to be for him because he hasn't gotten the lift back on that fastball. So still a lot of moving parts in this arsenal right now. But to me, it's also a good sign too that like he feels good enough that he's still working on things like this as opposed to just, we just got to get healthy, just get on the mound.
Right.
Like, no, he feels good enough that he's still toying with a lot of this stuff. He said he had started working on kind of fixing that slider up before he got hurt in 23 for good, in 23. But he said he was able to come back into camp and feel like he was in a spot where he could start hammering at that again and keep working on it. He said Chris Hook gave him a cue a little while ago, pretty recently, that finally to him felt like a little bit of a breakthrough where he was starting to get some of the movement he wanted on that slider. But the fact that he's able to work on that now is also a good sign as far as just how he's feeling. But basically the bottom line here is he's way further ahead than what either of us expected. And from Pat Murphy's comments, even what Pat Murphy expected. And Pat Murphy was always probably sounding a little bit more optimistic than even we were. He was pretty realistic about the timeline, but I think just hammering a lot more of the he's a bulldog, he's going to come back, that kind of stuff. So he's way ahead in that regard. Command, unsurprisingly, is probably going to take a little bit of time to get back. And then also, like, the pitch shapes, especially that fastball, the four-seamer, it's not the same pitch it used to be. And we're not even talking about the velo. Like, it plays differently with where it's at right now, with how that ball is moving out of his hand. So still a lot of boxes to check. And I do think now that once he goes on a rehab assignment, that's probably going to be the thing that he and the Brewers are really watching. Not necessarily where's the velo, not necessarily the results. What's that fastball doing? And then it's also like, how's that slider looking as well? I'm a lot more optimistic on that one. I think he's found something there. And like I said, like the changeup looked really good. The one curveball he threw had a lot of depth to it. Like those all look good. It really just comes down to, can you get that fastball shape back to where it's always been? Or is there going to come a point on that rehab where if it's not coming back, are they going to have to bite the bullet and say, okay, this is just kind of how you're throwing the baseball now. Now we got to find a way to use it. But either way, no matter which way it goes, between, having that newer slider and then also trying to figure out what you're going to do with this fastball, everybody should expect that when he comes back, he's not going to be attacking guys quite the same way that he used to.
Yep.
Even in a best case scenario, where the results are really, really good yet, the way that he's getting those outs, the way he's going about it, it is going to be a little bit different than what he did before. And I think he knows that. I think the Brewers know that. But these are just like some of the really technical things to keep an eye on. especially as we get into the season. Even if you're someone who doesn't like to dive into all this, you don't fully understand all of it, that's okay. But you're kind of wondering, like, why haven't they brought him back yet? Why is he still on the rehab? Like, everything seems to check out. He's throwing harder. This is probably going to be what it is. So just be aware of that, because that is going to have implications most likely for how the Brewers choose to handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking now, I almost wonder if the slider is getting a little more lateral movement because he's getting around the ball just a little bit more now in general. I'm wondering if just the way his hand is working and the way his arm is operating, if he's cutting the ball, just if that's connected at all. I wonder if there's almost we deal with a lower level of player, obviously, but we have players who, working to get behind the ball can start messing with other pitches. And then sometimes working on cutters can start actually helping breaking balls, or because you're working on a breaking ball, you start cutting your fastball a little bit because you're getting around it a little bit more. Like, while you're almost retraining your arm, I'm not saying Woodruff couldn't get around this, but I wonder if in the process of kind of retraining everything while he's working on changing the slider, it's probably not, but just it crossed my mind. I wonder if there's a connection there at all where he's kind of getting just a little bit further around the ball on his fastball when he's throwing it, because he's been so focused on trying to improve the slider lateral movement or something. But yeah, either way, like you said, that is going to be the biggest thing to watch for him. His old fastball, and you mentioned it a little bit, if he threw it 93, 94, it still played. It didn't matter. It was great when he was touching 99 with it, because then it was really, really hard on hitters. But there were plenty of starts where he was kind of that 93 to 95 type of spot, but he could still be heavy fastball and just go at guys. And heavy fastball is a good way to describe it, honestly. It just really, really got in on hands of hitters, and it got above barrels, and it was a really, really good pitch. So like you said, if it goes from being an elite offering to, if he's not able to refine it, he's going to kind of have to reinvent the entire way that he attacks hitters. And again, going back to what I talked about all offseason, I think that's the thing I would expect him to be able to do well. It's just a matter of how long does it take him to get used to this new plan of attack, this new way to go at hitters, and really just his entire operation would kind of change. So that'll be what we're watching. Like you said, we'll have StatCast when he presumably is in Nashville for all of his rehab start, or at least most of his rehab starts. And yeah, that'll be kind of the main thing to look at. I would imagine the velo will at least hold steady or maybe continue to go up throughout the rehab process, but the most important thing is going to be the shape, and it's not really all that close. It's easily the thing to watch the most. And like you said, I texted you right away. I was like, he looks good. I think his fastball shape changed though. and then you saw like 2 pitches on video and we're like, yeah, yep, I'm going to ask about that. So yeah, it's interesting. I'd imagine they would probably just try and go full blown cutter with it if he can't refine it and make it an actual true cutter rather than just like a cutting fastball. But yeah, we will see. But either way, other than that, I would say, I mean, it just continues to be really good news every time we see him out there. And that's just really exciting. But we did have one other debut with Jose Quintana. He ended up working two scoreless innings in his debut. I know you mentioned he expects to kind of build up over the last, or he's got 2 more build up outings coming up, and then he would be able to get up into the 5 inning range, which I imagine would be his first major league start in the regular season. Is that kind of how they're looking at it?
It's weird now because no one is really, when we keep asking about it, no one is giving us a definitive yes or no answer on whether he's actually going to be ready for that first turn through the rotation. He didn't say directly, but the way he was talking, it made it sound like he was pointing to like, yep, 2 more buildups in spring training. Good to go for that first start. Pat Murphy has just been a little bit more coy about it, saying we don't know if he's going to be ready for that first start. And I was looking at the dates here, like with the way it lines up, he should have time for 2 more buildups and then ready to pitch in that 5th game, if you do the math looking on the calendar. So again, that's kind of why it seemed like what he said it was leaning toward, yep, he's going to be able to pitch maybe in a not 100% stretched out capacity, but ready to give you like good deal length in that first start. Brewers are not committing to that, though. We'll talk about this once we get to the portion of the show where we're kind of previewing the roster. I mean, I think he's going to be on it anyway because even if let's say even if he doesn't make that first start, he's going to be ready for the next one. So that comes before like the minimum 15 days he would either, number one, have to spend on the IL, or number two, have to spend in AAA, because they could option him if he agrees to it. I looked this up last night because we were trying to figure out, like, what are they going to do with him here? And it popped into my head, like, oh, they could option him. He's only used one option year in his career, and that was as a rookie back in 2012. So that means he has 2 left. He would just have to consent to it because he's been in the big leagues for, 5 years is the cutoff, but he's been in the big leagues for over 10 years. So they could go that route, but then again, that's a 15-day minimum as well. So it's the same timeline. And if he's ready to start before then, that's just, I don't think they're going to do that. So I think he's going to be on the roster anyway. My educated guess is that he will start that 5th game, and maybe it's a little bit more of a bullpen day. Or if he's really not ready at all and they really don't want to put him on a mound, which I have a hard time believing, because this is a veteran guy he's been around. He can handle it. But if they really don't want to do that, then you probably just go the route of he's on the roster anyway, and maybe you make some moves in the bullpen and get ready for a bullpen game. He's going to be on there anyway. I don't see why he wouldn't be. But that's just kind of how things are looking for him right now.
Yeah. Depending on weather, obviously, that first week, the Brewers would obviously have opening day and then an off day. So technically they probably could bring Freddie back around for that 5th game if needed, because they won't do that. They already did.
Murphy said they're not going to do that. So we know it's going to be 5 guys that first turn through.
Okay. Then, yeah, I mean, it would make sense for, like you said, you add a couple pen arms. That would be the, if I'm not mistaken, well, again, we'll talk about this when we get there, but assuming Uribe does make the roster and serves his suspension, that would be the first game that he would either be back or that they could bring in another pen guy to kind of help eat some innings. So, yeah, I would imagine it would just make sense to keep building him up. Even if he only goes 3-4 innings, he can be the bulk guy as part of a bullpen game, and that would make plenty of sense even in that case. So, yeah, I would imagine, just kind of reading the tea leaves, like you said, it feels like that 5th game would still make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that's – I would guess, like I said, nothing has been said to us for sure. My educated guess is he'll for sure be on the roster, and he's probably going to be involved in that 5th game in some capacity. So that's what we have on those 2 guys. Now we have a litany of general roster updates. I teased it at the beginning of the show. And if you've been following along just with camp from a variety of different sources, you know that a lot has happened this week, particularly on the injury front, and just a lot of implications for how things are going to look. Things are just kind of all over the place for a couple of days here, but now it seems like we're starting to get a few more answers here. But the first one, and this is the one that really took the headlines. So on last week's show, we had talked a little bit about Joey Ortiz playing second base while Brice Turang was playing shortstop. And we had both said that was most likely just a way to get Joey's bat still in the lineup, keep getting at bats while they got Brice that look at short. Turns out that no, that was actually how they wanted to line things up on opening day. And I'm just going to say it right now. It never made sense to me. I don't understand why they did it. Yep. And like the closest thing that we got to an explanation, so that this all broke before I got down there. Adam McKelvey was the one who really had like the first story on it, but it was still a topic of discussion by the time I got down there, because it was like over the weekend, and I got down on Friday night. My first day in camp was Saturday, so it was still like a fresh topic of discussion. But like this just never made sense to me, because, well, it has nothing to do with Caleb Durbin or Ollie Dunn. Those guys are going to be at third base no matter what. So you essentially just decided during the middle of spring training that now you think Brice Turang's a better shortstop than Joey Ortiz, which we both always disagreed with, mainly just because of the arm. Yeah. And the irony here is that ended up ended up happening here was arm related. Brice Turang developed shoulder fatigue, and Pat Murphy said it was because he was making longer throws from shortstop. So now everything's going to get switched back, and it's Ortiz at short. Turang's going to play second. This has been finalized now, like it's been confirmed. This is what they're going to do because, they don't want to put Brice back over there now because they don't want him dealing with making longer throws. But this just never made sense to me because, like I said, we talked plenty about how to both of us, at least Joey always profiled as the better shortstop of the two. They could both do totally fine over there. Like, you could put Brice Turang at shortstop on a lot of teams. I'd be willing to bet that he would be an above average defender at short, not an elite one, but above average. But it basically sounds like what happened is, they were still giving him like the occasional start over there just in case, just to see everything look. They kind of knew how it was going to land, though. They wanted Joey over there. They wanted Brice at second. And it sounds like they saw him make a couple plays at shortstop, and suddenly they were like, he needs to play there now, which is just, I don't know. That seems weird to me. Like, were you shocked that the rangy second baseman could also make rangy plays at shortstop?
Yeah, I don't get. It didn't make any sense to me. And like you said, we like straight up were like, well, that wouldn't be what they're doing here. Like last week, we were like, nope, no, this is just to make sure Ortiz is still getting at bats, and they got done at third, and they're giving Turang his opportunities at short. And then the next day, while we were both traveling, it comes out that like, yep, this is what we're probably going to be doing now. Turang at short and Ortiz at second. And more than anything, to me, it's like, why make two guys change positions in a seat like that? That also just doesn't make any sense. Like you could make one person go from third to short, which, by the way, Ortiz had played short until last year. So it's not like this would be a new change. Turang had been a couple years. He'd maybe played a little bit in Nashville, but he was mostly second base for 2 years. So now you're making a guy go back to short who hasn't done it. And obviously, as it turns out, the arm wasn't really ready for it, or at least it seems that way. But yeah, I just it didn't make any sense to me. We were both texting each other, just completely confused. And then, obviously it, not in a great way, but it ended up working out how I think we both prefer. And hopefully it works out when we get into the season. But that was a weird, like 3-day stretch where it just, like you said, I remember we were in Florida. I don't think it was even a televised game, but some of the beat reporters who were down there at the time, Kurt and Adam McKelvey and those guys, were tweeting out like, oh, Turang just made a really nice play up the middle. And then, oh, he made another one. And like you said, it was like the next day the Brewers were like, wow, he can do that. We never saw that coming. We're going to just play him at short now. And I don't know. It was a weird timeline, but in the end, as long as Turang is healthy, nothing really got hurt by it, and I think we're ending up in the spot that we want it to be in. But very, very confusing and interesting sequence of events for us over the last week.
Well, and the funniest part of this is after the, I don't want to say full-blown injury, the fatigue is like the official term they're putting on it, but after the throwing issue, Murphy said, well, we were kind of splitting hairs anyway with switching it over. So it's fine that we can switch it back. Then why did you do it in the first place? If you're really splitting hairs at that point, why don't you just say, let's leave the platinum glover at second base, and the guy who has come up as a shortstop his entire career and slid over to third for one season, why don't we just put him at shortstop? I really do not understand what happened here. Like what? And again, this is not so much a Brice Turang can't play shortstop.
No,
like I said, we just always thought that between Turang and Ortiz, you had two guys who could play a good shortstop. We thought that, between Turang winning a platinum glove, but also just we figured if you are going to split those hairs, it's Ortiz who comes out just a little bit ahead, mainly because of the arm. But if you're splitting hairs, I don't understand what it was that you saw that, like, obviously, if you're going to make that switch, it shouldn't be because you were splitting hairs. It should have been because you saw something like super definitive, super decisive, where you were like, oh, we had this wrong. But now they switched it back and he said, well, we were splitting hairs anyway. Like, I don't understand what happened here. And I have no problem saying that either. Like I'm usually more often than not going to defend decisions the Brewers make, but I really don't understand what they saw here. Like, and even if you assume they really did see something, and the splitting hairs comment is just kind of covering just his way of saying, well, we're comfortable moving it back anyway. Like Brice Turang has been in the system. When was he drafted? 2016?
No, 2019.
2019.
Yeah.
2019. I
maybe 18, 18 or 19, but it was
okay.
One of those two.
It was in that era. Yeah. So he's been in the org for what, 7-8 years now.
Yep.
You drafted this guy. He's come up through your entire system. You've seen him play defense in the big leagues. Like, you know everything there is to know about this guy's defensive ability. What could you really have seen on the field that day that like completely flipped that on its head, seemingly to the point where you were like, no, he needs to play shortstop? I'm just a lot of things. Like, I don't understand it. I really don't. And again, like it's fine. It ended up the way it was, but like, the fact remains there was something process-wise going on that drove them to do this and to change it so abruptly. And that's what I'm not so sure I like.
Yeah.
Because that just, I don't know, it seems so on a whim, like all the stuff we spent the last 10 minutes talking about. Like, confusing to me. And I don't understand really quite exactly what the process was here.
No, it was. I don't know that there was a process, and I don't mean that in like a completely like what are they doing way, but it felt like you said on a whim. Like it felt like it was almost like a gut feel type thing. Like, ooh, Turang looked pretty good there. Ortiz has looked pretty good at second when we put him there. Let's just do that now. Like that's almost kind of how it felt. Like I don't know, and obviously you can't really just go off of. We don't have many eyes on a lot of the spring training games. You obviously have only been there for a few days at this point. But just, I mean, even looking at, I don't want to use fielding percentage, but given it's spring training, you don't really have a choice here. Like Ortiz has been completely clean. It's not like he's making errors. It's not like Luis Urias over there who could make plays, who could get to balls, but then he'd launch it into the third row when he was at shortstop. Like it's not like that. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's just nothing really, none of it made sense. And I really can't come up with any good reasoning for it. So I think it's probably time to move on because we're just rambling about this at this point.
Well, right. So the next order of business is to actually get to what's going on with Turang, what the timeline looks like. So he was taken out of the lineup on Saturday, I believe it was. It's been a long 2 weeks, and the days are kind of blending together for me. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit here. But I believe it was Saturday because I think it was the first day I was down here. He was supposed to be in the lineup. They scratched him late. Murphy said it was just precautionary, said the trainers actually cleared him to play that day. If it was a regular season game, he would have been in there. They were just playing it safe. The thought was he'd be back in there pretty quickly. Then he was out for a second day. Then Murphy said he'll be back as a DH tomorrow. And then all of a sudden it comes out that, no, he underwent an MRI. He tried to throw on Monday, and it supposedly did not go very well to the point that they didn't feel comfortable putting him back in a game. And they said the MRI came back clean, but now they're talking about like 3 to 5 days before he's going to be back in the lineup. They're still saying no IL stint, no structural damage is what they're telling us. But it's just kind of where it sits now. So we're kind of in limbo a little bit here as far as seeing if that 3 to 5 day timeline, which is now like the second or third timeline they've given us for him being back in the lineup, we're kind of in limbo, just waiting to see if that's actually how it's going to play out. But if that is how it plays out, he's going to be on the opening day roster. He'll be the second baseman. But we are going to have to wait and see a little bit because, and Murphy did admit this too when he told us that now it's Ortiz at short. He said, well, 2 days ago, I told you guys it was probably going to be Turang, and look where that led us. So things happen. But that's where he's at right now. It sounds like there's still not a lot of concern. And Turang himself echoed that, saying that, he wants to be out there. The Brewers and Turang have maintained that if it were the regular season, he might still be out there anyway. This is something he could play through. They're just playing it safe has kind of been the the line so far that we've heard repeated. So that's where things stand right now. But that's just one of the litany of injury updates that we have for the week. Tobias Myers pulled his left oblique in his last start over the weekend. So he told us, once we were able to talk to him, that he thought it was going to be pretty minor. He actually said it happened on a pitch to J.D. Davis, and he threw like 5 more pitches because he just thought it was a cramp and he could kind of keep going and then it would loosen up. But after those 5 pitches, decided, no, I should probably pull myself. So he did. He sounded optimistic about it. Pat Murphy, having been around for a little bit and just knowing how oblique injuries work, was a little bit more pessimistic in his initial comments, but they got the MRI back. It's best case scenario for him, basically. They were hoping that he could possibly even begin throwing again, like within a week. And that if that were to happen, you're looking at like a return already sometime in April. So hopefully, if everything kind of stays the way that it's looking right now, you could be looking at him only having to miss a few turns early in the season, and then he'll be back. And really, the bigger deal for this seems to just be that it's interrupting the buildup more so than any actual concerns about the injury itself. But at the same time, it's an oblique. Obliques are tricky. Sometimes they can take longer than expected, which we'll actually get to when we talk about Aaron Ashby in a few minutes. But Myers is going to be on the IL. Murphy did list Logan Henderson as a candidate to make a couple of those starts, those first few turns through. He had been optioned to AAA before Myers had that injury. And what Murphy told us is they can't bring him back to big league camp during spring training. So he's, once you send that guy down, you can't bring him back. But you can always still just recall him once the season starts if you need him in any capacity. So it sounds like that's something that they're considering. I would venture to guess that they're probably just going to try to tandem with some guys who are already on the roster before they go that route. I think that may have just been Murphy kind of wanting like the higher ceiling guy, or just trying to talk up the higher ceiling guy. Maybe, I don't know, give him a little bit of motivation to try to pitch for that spot. But he did throw his name in the card, so it's a name to watch. But I would guess that we're probably going to see more along the lines of maybe Connor Thomas gets more innings, Elvin Rodriguez get more innings. I would say even like Chad Patrick's probably someone who would be a pretty good candidate to get a lot of starts if Myers is out for even a little longer than they're anticipating. Because for me as well, I think Henderson just needs a little bit more development before I would trust him to make big league starts. I think that's a big part of this too. We saw him pitch in Peoria a couple days ago, which is a StatCast-equipped stadium. The cutter and the slider are not looking very good. They're just not. Like, he's not getting the kind of movement you want to get on either of those pitches right now, which essentially means he's still a 2-pitch pitcher, fastball, changeup. And when you're a 2-pitch pitcher with 2 pitches, both moving arm side, I have a hard time projecting that into more of a stretched out starter role. So I think it is better for him. And I would not be shocked if the Brewers agreed to keep him in AAA for a little bit, because they're for as good as the stuff that he has right now is those main 2 pitches, there is quite a bit more development that he needs to show some progress on as far as a third and even a fourth pitch go. And I'm sure you would agree with me too, Spencer, as the minor league guru.
Yes, I mean, that's always been the thing with him. We've talked about it a couple times the last few weeks. It's always been about getting a glove side offering of some sort to be consistent. Last time out before that, or the last time he was on a StatCast field, they weren't great, but they looked okay. I would say they were more bordering on like average offerings. This time they were bad. They were not good. So it's always been about consistency with him. He has shown flashes with both of them. In that particular game, he had showed both at the same time, which was kind of rare. Yeah, this time they weren't there. So like you said, I think you see him in Nashville, you give him, I guess I would put it this way. It wouldn't shock me if you saw maybe some struggles early in the season in Nashville, because I think if I were the Brewers, I'd be sending him down there saying, hey, we don't really care about the results on these 2 pitches, but we need you to throw them in games and find them and try and be more consistent with them. we know the fastball and the changeup are there. Obviously, they're not going to just go full cutter slider and just say, hey, forget about those two. Like, he's still going to be using those a lot. But if I were the Brewers, I would be sending him down there with the orders of, okay, we need to see decent cutter and slider usage in games, and we need to be able to find out if we can get at least one of those to be an average major league offering, because then you get the 3 pitches. And like you said, the changeup and cutter, or changeup and fastball, are legitimately good pitches. So if you get one more that can at least hold its own, then I think you can start looking at him as a starting option at some point this year. But he's got to find one. And in my opinion, the only way you really get to that point is by throwing them in games and learning by the way hitters react, and also just obviously getting the data on them and everything else. But you gain confidence in them by throwing them in games too, and starting to see the results that you're hoping for. So I'm guessing they'll do that, and I'm hoping they'll do that. I have no idea if that's actually the case, but if I were the Brewers, that's what I would be sending him down to AAA with the goal of, is to, let's find this 3rd pitch, and then that's when we start looking at you as a legitimate major league starting option for us this year.
The other guy who we found out this week is going to start the year on the IL, unsurprisingly, and I think we even talked about this last week already, Nick Mears. I believe we did talk about this when we talked about just that setback that he had with the illness, knocked him out for like a week, lost almost 10 pounds. We both said right away, like, they're going to put him on the IL. Like, even in a perfect world where like the buildup is expedited and going well once he comes back, they're almost certainly still going to do it, because that opens up another optional bullpen spot for the team. That's what they're doing. Murphy confirmed that he's going to start the year on the injured list. He's building back up. He first got back on a mound during the middle of this week. So he basically is on the timeline where he wouldn't be ready for opening day anyway. So he's going to start the year on the IL, continue to build up. Probably a good thing for both player and team. He could use a little more time, but also it does benefit the team more right now to have that optionable spot, especially with Tobias Myers now out for at least a couple of weeks to start the year. So it's just better to have that spot where you can cycle multiple arms through there. Like Perkins, who sustained one of the first injuries of spring training, fracturing his shin on that foul ball, he was cleared at the start of the week to begin light activity, not baseball activity, just activity. So like getting on a treadmill, just generally moving around a little bit more is what he was cleared for after his first checkup. He's going to have another check-in next week, and that's going to be the one where they decide, okay, can he start some light baseball activity? But right now, it was really just about he can at least start moving around a little bit. So seems like he's basically on schedule. I remember like late May was kind of the date that was thrown out for him, because even once he's ready to go, he is going to have to go back through basically the position player buildup, because he didn't get a spring training. So that's going to be something to watch as we keep moving forward here. And then Aaron Savali got the start on Wednesday, building up. He's where the Brewers want him to be in his progression. He's pretty much good to go. But Murphy did say that he's got a split finger on his pitching hand. That's kind of a vague term that could either mean, a split fingernail. I took it to mean more of like he's got a cut or a blister or something along those lines on his finger. But he pitched through it. Murphy said they're not concerned about it, but an injury update nonetheless. Brewers kind of approaching territory where they really can't afford to lose too many more guys. So it sounds like this is going to be something he's able to pitch through. He might have to anyways.
Yeah, I mean, Logan Henderson might have to make starts if we have too many more injuries. We might not have a choice, but I like you said, I think the split finger, to me, that sounds like a blister. So, which blisters can be a pain. Ask Ben Sheets, but yeah, obviously, I think Murphy even mentioned that he's dealt with it before. I think he said something along those lines.
Mm-hmm. So it's not new.
Yeah, so it sounds like something that he's well aware of how to handle it as a pitcher, and that's part of the equation too. If you know how to deal with stuff, you can kind of get through certain things just because you know exactly what you need to do to be ready. So yeah, definitely doesn't sound like a concern, but if it does become a concern, yeah, we're going to be pretty deep into the pitching depth before opening day even starts. So yeah, hopefully this just remains where it is right now, and it's nothing to be worried about.
Another thing to note with him too is he's a guy who spins the ball so much. He's going to throw a lot of breaking stuff, big spinning curveball, big spinning sweeper. Those guys do tend to deal with these kinds of issues more because to try to get that spin, you're usually like ripping off of some seams.
Yeah.
So like Rich Hill is a good one to think back to. He used to deal with blisters all the time back when he used to throw like a ton of high spinning curveballs. And a lot of times with these guys, it's just you got to figure out how to deal with it. So I wouldn't be surprised if Savali's got like pretty calloused fingers, or just kind of like fingers that like he gets blisters and they kind of scab over and then they'll break again. And he just kind of goes through that cycle a little bit. That's just kind of the nature of the game when you're spinning breaking stuff as often as he does. So I wouldn't be shocked if that's kind of what's going on here. Another former rotation candidate and someone the Brewers have said will stretch back out again once he's ready to go, Aaron Ashby, he's not progressing. So he's another guy who's been sidelined with an oblique issue. It's been a minute now. Murphy telling Adam McCalvey before I got down there into Phoenix, it might turn into a longer process than we thought. So not the most encouraging news on him. But at the same time, this is kind of more what I would have expected anyway. Once they said oblique, they gave a very optimistic timeline on him right out of the gates. So I think in terms of oblique injuries, this isn't like a crazy long absence. Still, just a little bit longer than that really optimistic timeline that they gave him to start with. Finally, the latest roster news, and this is where things really started to come into focus a little bit more. The Brewers making their latest round of spring training cuts. They optioned Andrew Monasterio on Wednesday, and then they reassigned Craig Yoho and Jorge Alfaro to minor league camp. So that kind of brings us right into our opening day roster projections, because I think that, once you get to this juncture, this is kind of the time to do it again when there's really only a couple of decisions left to make because things are really starting to come into focus now. With Monasterio optioned, and Spencer, if you want, you can pull up kind of the graphic that we have for this just so anyone watching on video can take a look at how we're projecting the roster. We don't have like each of our own lists because we said the same thing. Yeah, but Monasterio being out, that means Caleb Durbin's in. They haven't made this official. They haven't said anything to any of us, but just doing the math for yourself, Caleb Durbin is going to be on this roster because they optioned Monasterio. I don't really see any other method of roster construction that would make much sense.
No.
Especially because the only guys who are left in camp are now, who are not like locked into spots, are Tyler Black, who is, they can say what they want. He's not in the mix.
Yeah.
Like they'll say he's still in the mix because he's in camp. But then when I asked about how the defense is looking, I kind of got like a roundabout response that essentially meant it hasn't gotten better, which is kind of what the missing piece has been for him. So I have a hard time actually believing that he's in the mix. Then you have Isaac Collins, who has only played left field this spring. If he was in competition for a bench infield spot, we would have seen him play at least one inning at an infield position. Seems like they're only viewing him as an outfielder right now. So if that's the case, they could roster him as a fourth outfielder, but just in terms of preserving depth, it makes way more sense to option him and add a non-roster guy to the roster. Those non-roster guys who are left are Jake Bauers, Mark Canha, and Manny Margot. We both have Canha on the roster. Yeah. And I just think that's what makes the most sense, because not only does he give you a little bit of insurance at first base, he also gives you another option in that outfield mix if need be, who hits right-handed. And it could be Jake Bauers over Mark Canha, but a couple different factors at play here. I think Bauers is seen as more likely to accept an assignment to the minor leagues than Mark Canha would be. But number two, it's that handedness thing again, too. Jake Bauers, he's in a similar boat in that he plays first base and corner outfield, but another left-handed hitting corner outfielder that's kind of an awkward roster fit to me.
Yeah.
And, if you look at the numbers, Bowers has had a much better spring than Canna, but Canna is, if you look at like his last 6 spring trainings, he's just never hit in spring training. And the plate discipline is very clearly still there. He's got just as many walks as strikeouts in spring training. So I don't have any concerns, really. I think he's still the same guy that he's been for a couple of years now, which is the guy who's not going to drive the ball much, but because he gets on base so much, league average hitter, it's a good fit for a bench role.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be him. And, Pat Murphy said that it may not necessarily just be one of those guys. It's probably more of a comment just so as not to tip the team's hand as to what they're thinking. I can't see it being multiple guys. I can't see them clearing multiple spots on the 40-man to add more than one of these guys. So all of that is me saying that Monasterio's been optioned. That means Durbin's got that final infield bench spot. And then the final bench spot, I think, is either going to Mark Canna or Jake Bowers, and I'm picking Mark Canna. I think we both are.
Yep. I think it's Canna for the same reasons you laid out. I think the right-handed bat in the outfield is a nice option to have, considering you have Yelich, Mitchell, and Frelick all out there potentially. Facing a lefty starter might not be a bad day to get Canna a start in a corner spot. But for everything else we've talked about all offseason too, I think the plate discipline, he just gives a nice floor for that. Really, I wouldn't even consider it technically the last roster spot, but I think in terms of decision making, it's going to be the last roster spot. He'll have a bigger role than whoever ends up being the true 26th man, I think. But yeah, either way, I think it's Canna over Bowers. Margot to me isn't really in consideration. I think I wonder, given how bad he was last year, and he's done some okay things offensively this spring, but man, the defense has been rough, and the throws have been really rough on some of the throws he's made. I mean, he's like spiking stuff 50 feet in front of him and way off to the left. I've seen it like 3 times already. He seems like a guy who's going to have a pretty decent chance to just end up having to accept an assignment to AAA as well. So I think him and Bowers are more likely to be in that scenario, like you touched on. And then Canna would be much more likely to have actual interest around the league if he did end up getting cut from the major league roster. So, it's Canna. I don't think there's really any doubt. Capra, we've talked about a number of times, making it at this point out of options. Obviously, he's had a very good spring, and he brings, honestly, more than any other bench guy. Obviously, Turang could move to short, but Capra can actually handle shortstop too, if needed defensively. So that's a nice little plus for him as well. And I think this is kind of how we all kind of saw the Monasterio move coming. I don't think any of us were really expecting him to make the roster, especially with Capra being out of options and him having options. But that move really kind of solidified things, I think, on the offensive side. And then, you can get into the pitching side of things as well. But offensive side, 100% agree. I don't think there's really any other way I could actually see it playing out.
Yeah, I think the only chance Monasterio had was if they really felt that Durbin's defense at third base was so bad that it was worth sending him down to work on that. Clearly not the case. So Monasterio's out, unsurprisingly. I do think Margot would take a minor league assignment because, number one, this is a guy who, unfortunately for him, just did not do a single thing well last year, like on any side of the game. And has not had the greatest spring. The offensive numbers are actually okay, but you talked about how the defenses look rough. I also think he's just going to be looking at this situation and seeing, hey, like if I go down and take that minor league assignment, I'm another injury away from being right back up here.
Yep.
And I don't think that opportunity is really quite as clearly in front of him elsewhere. So I think it would make sense for him to take that. So I doubt he's going to make it. Like I said, I think Bowers is seen as more likely to take an assignment than Canna. I think Canna's a better fit for the roster anyway. So I think that's how it's going to end up shaking out. But yeah, that position player side looks pretty clear. And I teased earlier at the beginning of the show, like by this weekend, it should really be looking pretty clear. That's because Friday morning is the deadline for the Brewers to let all three of these guys know if they've made the team. So we're going to know over the weekend who's in. And that basically is that last spot. So that's really all we're waiting for on the positional side. And then as far as the pitching side goes, the Brewers have 13 healthy pitchers left in camp. So that's pretty straightforward there as well. Like we said, Ashby's going to be on the IL. Hall's already on the 60-day. Woodruff's going to be on the IL. Myers will be on the IL. Mears will be on the IL. So, you do all that, and that leaves you with 13 healthy pitchers in camp. There are 13 pitchers that you can roster on the 26-man. So pretty straightforward there. I think the only piece that's missing potentially as far as like a potential somewhat curveball goes, maybe they really decide that they don't want to burn that bullpen spot on a suspended Abner Uribe, in which case they would probably call up Grant Anderson on opening day and send Abner back down. That's the only thing that I could see maybe happening. The vibe that I got was before Myers got hurt, I think they were leaning towards let's just carry Abner, and then we can also carry a depth, like a length guy by ILing Nick Mears, and that kind of gives us that coverage. I had asked Murphy if that's kind of what they were thinking of doing. He said that's exactly like one of the conversations that we're having right now. That's something we've talked about, doing it that way. And then Tobias Myers got hurt. I think that's maybe the potential, like, okay, we're down a starter. We're going to have to fill these innings. Maybe it's not the best idea to burn that suspension on Abner right now. In which case, Murphy threw out like the end of April. They go on the road at the end of April. They face, I believe it's the Cardinals, and then I want to say the White Sox, but don't quote me on that. But it's a road trip at the end of April, and those last two series, I believe there's an off day in between them.
Okay.
So that again will be the time to do it. And then the road trip as well being like if you're losing, you only have to cover 8 innings in a road game. So that's why they would consider doing it on that back end of April as well. So that's maybe like the only potential difference I see here from what we have listed. Maybe they decide to do that then, in which case you're sending Uribe down on opening day and recalling Grant Anderson. But otherwise, I think things are pretty much locked into place here as far as how it's all going to look. So again, kind of just a chaotic week, all culminating in by the end of it, we got a pretty good idea of how things are going to be, really just save for who gets that final bench spot out of the NRI guys. But I think you can add one of those guys, 60-day Ashby. It all kind of falls into place. A couple of questions we got regarding the roster. Lucas asked us who should be the 4th and 5th starters to open the season with the injuries and Quintana still needing to build up. I guess that's the one thing we haven't talked about yet. We both have Tyler Alexander starting that 4th game. The Brewers have not announced him as the starter for that 4th game, but again, like he built up to 4 innings in his last outing. Like it all kind of points in that direction that he's going to be the guy. Like we've seen Connor Thomas build up to 3. We've seen Elvin Rodriguez build up to 3 ups, I believe, but Alexander's a little bit more stretched. He's the veteran guy, a little bit more experience. He's got experience in particular doing this kind of bouncing back and forth thing within a season. So I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be him. And then as far as 5th starter goes, like we said, I think Quintana's probably got a pretty good chance of just being in that mix, maybe on a truncated start in his first outing. If not, he'll probably still be on the roster and maybe they go bullpen game. That's just one turn through that they have to fill, though. So I don't think there needs to be a major debate there. And again, looking at the guys we have in this pen, especially with Abner and Elvin and even Elvis Peguero as well, kind of rounding this group out. 3 guys that you can option back down to AAA, swap them out pretty quickly. Again, maybe Chad Patrick does come up to be part of that mix for a game, especially for that game 5. We'll kind of have to see how it lines up. And we'll have to see how things are kind of lining up just in the minor leagues or with the kind of schedules that those guys are on at the very least too. But I think that what we have here, so rotation of Freddie Peralta, Nestor Cortez, Aaron Savali, Tyler Alexander, and then rounding it out either Quintana or bullpen game for the first turn through. I think that's probably how you're going to see it lined up. Nate asked us Woodruff to the 60-day to start the season and then just take it slow. I don't think he's going to be going on the 60-day. I would be a little bit surprised if he does, because with where he's at right now and with having debuted in a spring training game, I think once the regular season starts, you can probably kick off the clock on that minor league rehab assignment. And once you start that clock, you have 30 days. That's the longest that you can spend on a minor league rehab assignment, unless you suffer a setback and you need to shut it down and then restart it. But once you start one, you have 30 days. And if you're still healthy at the end of those 30 days, they either have to add you to the roster, or if you have options, option you, or if not, cut you off 40-man some other way. So I think with Woodruff, you're probably looking at more likely just put him on the 15-day, and then you start up that rehab assignment, and hopefully by the time those 30 days are up, he's both built up and the stuff is in a spot where they want it to be.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also always the option of, if things aren't going well and he has a setback of some sort or something, you can transfer him to the 60-day and it would still be retroactive to when he started the 15-day IL. So I think you start him on the 15-day, like you said, start the rehab assignment, and as long as everything's going well and continuing at the pace that it is right now, like you said, I think that pace kind of lines him up with being able to get through a month, essentially 30 days, and potentially being ready at that point. And I was just thinking this, I don't know if you know this, but if he were to be placed on the IL, does extended spring training count as part of a rehab assignment if he were to stay there? I'm curious on that.
I don't know that one off the top of my head. That is a good question, though.
Because they might be able to kind of push it a little bit further by keeping him in extended spring for a couple of weeks or something. But
I'd have to check on that one. That's not a bad question to ask too.
Yeah.
Like, just during the rest of the week here, I could always ask that and kind of just go through like what their options are exactly with that. But that is a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll see what the options end up being. But yeah, I agree. I don't think they need to put him on the 60-day. I don't think they would really want to put him on the 60-day to start the season. And they shouldn't. It's not like they're in dire need of a 40-man spot right now. And I mean, if Ashby's ends up being a bigger issue than they expected, I think he's a guy who could end up on that. Obliques can take a while, so it'll depend on how that all starts shaking out. But obviously, if he's not progressing, there might be other options, I guess is my point, for a 60-day spot if you need to open up a 40-man spot of any sort. But right now you don't need one, and I don't think the timeline really points to him needing to be on the 60 days. So no, I don't think he will be.
That'll bring it into all of the exhaustive roster math that we just spent a lot of time going over. With that, we can kind of just jump into a couple of loose end spring training notes, just kind of a mix of some other stuff that's happened this week, stuff that I've had the chance to talk to guys about this week. Start with some pitching stuff, obviously, because we're both pitching nerds, just some things that guys are working on. Bryan Hudson. So we already knew that he was working on a changeup. It was a story pretty early in camp. But he's also working on a sinker. He debuted the sinker, at least for the first time, in front of pitch tracking technology in Peoria a couple of days ago. And the one he threw, it's like right around like zero vert with like, I think it had like 15 inches arm side or something. So like it is a legitimate sinker. It's got some depth to it, which is not surprising because he's kind of like he's a sidearm guy basically. And when you're throwing the ball from down there, like you're naturally able to orient the ball in a way where you can get like the kind of spin direction you would need to actually get some sink. So that's something that he's working on as well. He told me that it's mainly something that he just wants to throw to the lefties, get like down and in on them. Really just gives him more coverage, because the thing that was lacking in his arsenal last year was something that moved to the arm side. Even his four-seam fastball doesn't have a lot of arm side run. It's usually either pretty straight or even once in a while it'll get a little bit cutty, kind of on that borderline. And it doesn't have a ton of ride. It mainly just plays because of his arm slot. That kind of goes both ways. Yes, you can get more sink, but also if you throw from a little bit lower, even just like a high fastball at the top of the zone that doesn't have a lot of lift but doesn't sink, you can get swings under that too, because it still looks pretty upshoot because of your arm slot. So it's kind of multiple ways to work that. But change up to righties, sinker to lefties that now gives him something in both of those matchups that will move to the arm side, can kind of serve some different purposes. Lucas has a question about Bryan Hudson. He asked, should there be concerns about his sweeper still not being back to last year's level? In his StatCast appearances this year, the velo has consistently been down on the sweeper. So it was actually pretty good in his first StatCast outing, velo-wise on everything. But yeah, since then, everything has taken a step back again right away, including the sweeper. Off the top of my head, I believe it's been in like that 78 to 79 range again, which is kind of where it was late in the year last year. I don't think quite as bad, but pretty close. Just to the point where it's coming in slower, so it's going to look like an even bigger, longer pitch now, even if the spin-induced movement on it is exactly the same. The observed movement's going to be a little bit different because it doesn't have the same velo. And yeah, I mean, you're right. It hasn't quite fully come back to where you would hope it would be. And that does kind of have just my gears turning a little bit. You know, Hudson didn't say this. The Brewers haven't said it, and I didn't ask it of anyone either. But there is a part of me that wonders, is he adding 2 pitches because there's concern that the velo is just not going to get back to where it was early in the year? To be clear, like on everything as a whole, it's not as bad as it was late in the year. Like the fastball in his past couple outings on StatCast has been in like that, like averaging 91, kind of 90 to 92. So not like the 89 where it was when the Brewers sent him down and refused to call him back up to the big leagues because the velocity did not come back. But it is still down from his peak. So there is a part of me that wonders, is adding 2 new pitches, yes, it was something he could have used anyway, but was there a little bit more urgency to do that in response to the velo not quite coming back? I don't know. To be clear, he was working on these over the offseason too. So like, I'm not saying it was he came back in camp, the velo wasn't there after his first outing, and then they scrambled to add 2 pitches. That's not what happened here. He was working on these over the winter. But was he working on them over the winter already just in case the velo didn't come back? I don't know. You know, we hear about guys adding new pitches in spring training all the time, but a reliever coming in and adding 2 pitches over the offseason into spring training, that one feels a little bit more rare to me. Like, you don't usually see relievers come back with 2 new pitches. So Hudson is trying to be a 5-pitch reliever now if he adds these 2 new pitches, which is a little bit unheard of. You are seeing, like, you know, more 3 and 4 pitch relievers now, but 5 pitches, like, he's basically trying to build out a full starter's arsenal here while pitching out of the bullpen, usually still in pretty short spurts. Like, the most he would go probably now is two innings. But yeah, like, this is still a story. It is still something to watch because, you know, it looked like in the first outing, like everything was back to normal. But now it's looking more like maybe this just is the new normal for him. And maybe the fluke was early last year when he had a little more velo. And this is actually just where he's going to be sitting. So it is something to watch.
Yeah, it's absolutely something to watch. I think, like you said, when he first started adding these pitches, I did kind of wonder if it was almost not a backup plan, but in a sense, a backup plan to, if he doesn't get back to where he was last year, do these kind of help cover up for some of that, where they can maybe give him other options where, you know, at times maybe guys are starting to actually be able to square up a fastball if it's at 89, 90 instead of 91 to 93. Same thing with the cutter and the sweeper just being down a little bit. Obviously, the cutter was kind of behind, but we've also, in the past, we've heard Chris Hook and the Brewers talk about how they like to have all these fastball variations. And I know he mentioned for now he just wants to throw the sinker to lefties, but it wouldn't shock me if he gets comfortable with that. And then they say, hey, we can kind of use the cutter, help the cutter play up a little bit against righties by maybe throwing a sinker in once in a while and making them kind of the X's they talk about and all those different things. Like, if he's going to throw 5 pitches, it wouldn't shock me if the Brewers try and full-blown Brewers him and go and just use them the way they like to do it, like they did with a guy like Colin Ray and stuff. And obviously smaller stints or shorter stints, it's a little different because you're not seeing an order multiple times where you're trying to kind of keep them on their heels, even though they've already seen you once. But if the stuff is diminished a little bit in terms of velo, and, like you said, it might become a little bit easier to read the sweeper when it's slower and all those types of things. These might be pitches that help kind of keep the hitters honest a little bit more and make them think a little bit longer. And that can almost, in a sense, it's not really truly perceived velocity, but when hitters are thinking a little bit longer, that's essentially what it is. If hitters have to think a little bit longer, the pitches look a little bit faster because their reaction time is now lessened. And I think that might be what they would be going for there, where they're like, hey, we can kind of get the fastball to play where it used to by making them think about other pitches and other things that might have to be in the back of their head. So that's kind of where my mind went when I saw him starting to add these pitches, and it definitely would not surprise me if that was part of it here.
Speaking of adding pitches going the other way, going arm side from a lefty for a lefty who normally doesn't really have that. I know when the Brewers traded for Nestor Cortez, one of the first things we said was, I wonder if they're going to try to add a sinker. And we don't know that, but we have learned that Chris Hook wants him to throw his changeup a lot more. That was one of the first things that the Brewers told him, or that Chris Hook told him when he came over in that trade. Cortez talked to us at his locker a couple days ago early in the week, and he said, yeah, that's something we're working on right now. We want to mix that pitch in more just to have something going the other way. So, Brewers are going to Brewers. And another example of them doing that, I talked to Connor Thomas earlier this week and did kind of a story on how he's evolved his arsenal a little bit and how he did that on his own with the Cardinals, and then now how the Brewers are kind of helping him take that next step forward on top of that. One of the things that he said the Brewers have him working on is they want him to throw his cutter to both sides of the plate. So last year, he really started to hone in on that cutter up and into righties. And I asked him about that. He said it was mainly just because, he looked at some data and some metrics and some software that teams have. And that told him, it's going to play the best up and into righties. But he also talked to just teammates, opponents, and they all told him that cutter from your slot and from your angle, the angles you're creating on the mound, it looks like it's boring way inside on this heavy when you throw it up and in there. So that's kind of why he decided on using it that way. But he said the Brewers have said, no, let's try to think of some more ways that we can use this pitch, set up more sequencing, help it play off other pitches even better, or help other pitchers play up even more because you've established that you can go here with the cutter. So again, Brewers going to Brewers. They're playing a lot of the greatest hits again with a lot of these guys they brought in this year. Certainly won't be the last time they do it either. So just a couple of updates on that front. Just some things that I've heard in the week that I've been in camp. We'll have to talk about this one as well because we got 3 questions on it, unsurprisingly, after he pitched against the Brewers on Wednesday. Shane Smith threw 4 scoreless innings in a Cactus League game at American Family Field a couple days ago. If you'll remember, he was a name that we had talked about a few months back as maybe the Brewers protect this guy from the Rule 5 draft. They did not, and he was promptly picked by the White Sox with the first pick in the Rule 5 draft. The White Sox have now announced that he's going to make the opening day roster. He's most likely going to be a part of their starting rotation. So basically, we got 3 different questions about this. Did the Brewers make a mistake letting him go? Why do they discard Shane Smith but keep Chad Patrick if they aren't even considering Patrick as a starter option at this time? Can Matt Arnold please get back in the DeLorean and not expose Shane Smith to the Rule 5 draft? So all these questions kind of on the same front. I guess I'll go with the Patrick one first, though. That came from Gary. Just because nobody has said Patrick's name doesn't mean he's not in consideration. I'd be willing to bet he is in consideration. They put him on the 40-man for a reason. So I understand the question, but my guess is they are considering him as a starter.
Yeah.
You just haven't heard Murphy say his name. Basically, I mean, Murph just threw one name out there as far as a prospect goes. That doesn't mean that that's the only guy they're thinking about. So I think Patrick is going to be in the mix. Like we just talked about, I think we're actually more likely to see him than Logan Henderson if they really need to fill some innings for more than a couple turns through that rotation. But then as far as Shane Smith goes, I know that the stuff is looking really good. Stuff is already like quite solid last year.
Mm-hmm.
I will say he was not throwing like a 98 to 99 last year like he is now. So he has taken steps forward since then. But even before that, like it was pretty good stuff. I think like I do think the extra tick of fastball velo helps him because I don't think shape wise that was a very good
Right.
fastball to begin with. So he had like the rest of the arsenal was pretty good, but I think that was a much more mediocre fastball at like the 94 to 96 that he used to be at. Because again, it was like it got little cutty without actually having like enough cut to really play as a good pitch. Like it's kind of in that gray area. But now that he's sitting 98 to 99 on it, that's going to play because he's got that extra tick of velocity that he didn't show last year. But I keep coming back to like you can't protect everybody. And I think that with where the Brewers are at, I think they had a pretty good reason to believe he just was not going to pitch a whole lot of innings for them in 2025. So if that's the case, yeah, I mean, you're not going to use a 40 spot on him. I'm sure they probably also knew there was a pretty decent chance that he was going to get selected too. Like, they're not stupid. I'm sure they had some concept of kind of what the perception of him was throughout the rest of the league. But at the end of the day, when you have a lot of good relievers, you can't keep all of them. Like, this is how the Brewers got Bryan Hudson, who we just spent a long time talking about. The Dodgers had so many good pitchers that they had to cut Bryan Hudson. It's not necessarily a reflection of the Dodgers not believing in Bryan Hudson. It just means they didn't have room for him because they had so many good pitchers in front of him on the depth chart. And I do think it was kind of a similar situation here where, yes, the Brewers probably knew there was a good chance he was going to get picked. At the same time, like, you look at all the guys who are in this bullpen who were in front of Shane Smith on the depth chart. Now, I think the velo bump is like another thing to talk about too. Should the Brewers have known that was coming? Yeah, because I do think with the velo bump now, you probably can make a very good case that he should be or would have been now suddenly ahead of guys who previously would have been in front of him.
Yeah.
Because the stuff ticked up. So should the Brewers have known that was coming? I don't know. But just the general point of, I think at the time that they needed to make that decision, I think they had a very good reason to believe that he just was not going to throw enough innings for them in 2025 to make it worth putting him on the 40-man roster relative to a bunch of other guys. And the reality is, again, like just when you're a good pitching development organization with a stocked bullpen, you're going to lose good arms. And that's what happened here. So is it possible the Brewers go on to regret it? Absolutely. But this is still not yet something that I'm losing a whole lot of sleep over.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess I would say I'm comfortable saying that it was a mistake to a degree. I think anytime one of your players gets drafted number 1 in the Rule 5 draft, that was probably a borderline mistake at that point. Almost in a sense that you may have missed out on some value that you might have been able to get even in a trade of some sort. Like you think about the Brewers getting Oliver Dunn last year. They gave up a couple of interesting prospects to do that and get him before the Rule 5 draft even took place. If Shane Smith was being seen as the number 1 prospect that was going to be attainable in the Rule 5 draft, or at least, one of the top ones, it makes me wonder if they might have been able to get, a couple guys who weren't close to Rule 5 eligibility and add them to the system, or one guy or whatever. So I don't know. I obviously wasn't fielding calls or making calls. That would have been Matt Arnold, but just something I wonder about because we have seen that in the past where guys who are going to generate Rule 5 interest end up getting traded to somebody who just immediately protect them. And in that case, the White Sox, I don't think they'll have a problem with this considering they are very bad, but they have to keep Shane Smith on the roster all season no matter what. a team that would have traded for him and then added him to the 40-man could have optioned him, could have done anything, any type of roster maneuvering that they want. So you would have thought that there would be interest in a guy like that if he was going to potentially go number one. That, again, that's just a thought. There's no true proof of anything there. There never will be. But even then, I think you can say it was probably a mistake, because I think if you looked at the current version of Shane Smith, he would factor into the Brewers' plans this year. I think he would be somebody that would be looked at as a very, very real option to help the team. But at the same time, I think it's an understandable mistake for all the reasons you laid out, where it's like, at the time, that really isn't the pitcher that we thought we were dealing with. We both talked about it. We thought he was a very legitimate candidate to be protected at the time going into the draft, but we also both agreed, I think at the end, neither of us chose to protect him when we said who we would protect. We might have in one of the, I know we did that a couple times, so it's possible we did, or one of us did, but either way, it was back and forth. Like, it was very back and forth on him in our minds, and they left him unprotected. Obviously, it's worked out, and good for him, man. I mean, this is an undrafted free agent who's now worked his way through a system, didn't get protected, got selected by a team, and I mean, he's been very, very good in spring training. He's put up some, I mean, I know he went through the Dodgers, top of their order, basically striking out 2 or 3. He struck out Yelich the other day against the Brewers. Like, he's put down some good hitters. He's looked good. He's absolutely earned this opportunity. And sometimes these types of things, if the Brewers did not see a true path to him really in the near future playing for the Brewers in the majors, sometimes there is an element of, let's give this guy the opportunity. If somebody's willing to give him a chance, let's go see if he can take advantage of it. Like, teams have done that before. I know that teams have done that I know the Brewers have done it. The Brewers did it when they traded Lucas Ursay. They said, we don't see a near future path to him pitching for us. They traded him to the A's for next to nothing, and that's worked out great for him. Obviously, when you look back on it, you're like, man, it sucks the Brewers didn't get anything for him or from him. But at the same time, I think there is a respect from players when you do those types of things. And I don't know if that's what this was. I'm not saying that was, but I'm sure it factors into the decision making a little bit, where it's like, well, we don't want to put him on the 40-man and then just hold him hostage if we're not actually going to give him innings. So we're, like Jack said numerous times, the Brewers probably had a decent idea he was going to get selected, or that he had a good chance of being selected. And they may have made that decision saying, you know what, give him the opportunity. If he takes it and runs with it, great. If not, he comes back and we get to try and figure this out again next offseason. So there's a lot of things that factor in here. Does it look like a mistake right now? I still think I would say yes, but I'd still come back to it being an understandable one, and one that I'm not going to ever really look back on and say, wow, what were they thinking? Why would they have done this? Why didn't they protect him? Like, if it works out for him, great. I'm just rooting. Honestly, I'm rooting for him to do well. I think it'd be a very cool story for him. He's been a fun pitcher to watch. I know his sister's very active on social media supporting him, and that's always cool to see. So I hope it works out, and he's certainly going to get plenty of opportunities on a White Sox team that I will be surprised if their loss total is in the double digits again this year. So we will see where it goes, but I hope for him specifically, and Bryce Wilson, I'll give him a little shout out too, but I hope those two have a great season and do whatever they can do. But yeah, nothing I'm ever going to lose sleep over, but I would still feel comfortable saying in my mind it is a bit of a mistake.
Well, seeing as every baseball team loses double-digit games every year, I'm assuming you wouldn't be surprised if the White Sox lost triple-digit games.
No, I said I would be surprised if I meant if they lose, I don't even know what I was trying to say. I forgot how I worded it, but I was trying to say triple digits is what I'm expecting.
That's what I figured. But yeah, I mean, I think it could very well prove to be a mistake. I think we can't say that right now because, number one, we still haven't seen him pitch a regular season game for the White Sox. But number two, we also have not seen how things have played out in the Brewers bullpen. Like, even if Shane Smith is amazing and the Brewers still finished with one of the best bullpens in baseball, I don't think even then you can say it was a mistake because they were still they were okay without him. So, but I get what you're saying.
Connor
I
Thomas
definitely
can
think it could
factor in
happen.
here too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Connor Thomas can factor in too because they had an open 40-man spot because they didn't protect Shane Smith and they selected Thomas. If he's a solid pitcher for the Brewers too, like that has to be part of the equation too. So we'll see for sure. I guess I should say it's more along the lines of like I'm seeing it trending towards being a mistake right now, but yeah, you're right. You can't really call it one yet. He has not even pitched a single inning in a real major league game.
We got more of a general question from HC Purdy that I just kind of threw in on the tail end of this segment. And this is an interesting one. He says, I'm not sure when it became common for catchers to give the pitcher a target and then drop the glove partway through the pitcher's delivery. I've watched some videos indicating the benefits of this for the catcher, but does it bother some pitchers to lose their target mid-delivery? So I've never even like looked into this because I always just assumed off the bat that it's a framing thing. You know, if you drop the glove, you kind of get to reset a little bit with how you're able to receive that pitch, as opposed to being like you're locked into this spot and then you really have to go and reach for something that missed the target. So I'm sure teams that have done the math on that and come to the conclusion that there's more to be gained from the framing benefits than there is to be lost from just pitchers being able to command their pitches, is what I assume is kind of the trade-off here. I mean, you just have to ask the guy. It's going to depend on the guy. I know, like for me, but I'm saying this is someone who wasn't good enough to pitch past my freshman year of high school. So not even my freshman year of high school. I was cut preseason my freshman year of high school after just throwing like in throwing some bullpens and some sim games. But like when I would pitch, I liked having the target for like the entirety of my windup, my delivery, all that stuff, because I was really big on like lock eyes on the target. Don't even blink or anything. Like if I could focus very strictly on that target, I could hit the spot pretty well. But these are big league pitchers we're talking about, so that's not the same comparison whatsoever. So this is going to sound a little circular, but I would imagine if it really bothered pitchers that badly, they wouldn't do this. So big league teams can quantify everything nowadays. I'm sure they've crunched the numbers, run models on stuff, and they feel they know pretty definitively that there's a lot more to be gained on the framing side of this than there is to be lost on like the location or execution side of this.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think the other part of this is that for the vast majority of the time, catchers are also going to be shifting their body to where they want the target, which still gives you a pretty nice target. You can look at the catcher's chest protector, like right in the stomach, basically. And that's where the glove was before they dropped it. So in my eyes, like if I'm a pitcher, for me, glove movement never really bothered me because I just locked in like where I wanted to throw the ball. It didn't really matter where the catcher's glove was. I actually told them on high fastballs not to give me a target up there because I didn't want to show it and have something come from the dugout or something. Like I said, I'll just throw it there, just call it and I'll throw it there. So my guess is for most major leaguers, that's kind of how they view it. They just lock in on the area that they're trying to throw and they don't really need the glove there. But even if they do need something, like I said, the body will basically always be there. If you want a high fastball and they're doing something along those lines, then you're probably using like the top of the catcher's mask as your target or something like that. Like you can always find something back there to be your target, even if the glove isn't there. And my guess is now they probably aren't even teaching them to use the glove for that reason, that they're saying, hey, find an area on the body or something based on where we're asking you to throw it and use that as your target if you really do need to stay locked in completely on it with your eyes. So this is a good question, though, because I've thought about it before. And from the catcher's perspective, it is absolutely for framing, especially on low pitches. What they're trying to do is work underneath the ball and catch the ball on the way up. Like they want it to be all one big motion. I know everyone Wilson Contreras ended up being kind of the poster child for some of this because of how much he moved his glove, and he probably overdid it a little bit. But these days, like framing is basically bringing the ball almost all the way back to the middle of the plate. And it's really what you're trying to do is trick the umpire into thinking you caught the ball in a different spot. Like, it's not about like, oh, I caught it and I just barely dragged it back into the zone. It's like he can't tell where I actually caught it and my glove ended up right in the middle. So to him, it looks like, oh, yeah, he must have caught it in the zone. Um, so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to work under the ball, get underneath the zone. And on low pitches, they're trying to catch that thing on the way up so that the umpire really just doesn't have a frame of reference on where you actually caught it, whether it was at the knees or a little above or a little below. Which to me, I've always, as somebody who umpired at much lower levels, so never had to deal with 90+ mile per hour fastballs. But I would think if I saw a catcher doing that I would be more inclined to just be like, well, no, it's a ball. Like, if I can't tell where you're catching it, nah, I think it was low then. Like, obviously they get graded on it and they have their own zone and they have to figure that stuff out. So it's not, you can't really be petty like that. But yeah, it's always been a little interesting to me that this is the way that seems to confuse umpires the most in a positive way for catchers. But it does. I mean, it works very well, and this style has been extremely successful. And the Brewers, Lucroy kind of was at the head of this type of style. He started doing this a little earlier than a lot of people. And he didn't quite drag it as far as they do now, but he was one of the guys who was dropping the target early and trying to get underneath the ball and work his way up to it. And it's really picked up steam, and now it's basically like the standard. It's what everyone is taught. So I guess that also probably helps that pitchers have, at this point, maybe even grown up with it being this way compared to 10 years ago where it was a new thing and pitchers were used to having that target the whole time. My guess is most pitchers have now gotten pretty used to it as well. So, but very good question. And I don't know if that's a perfect answer by any means, but I think that kind of lays out some of the reasons it probably isn't making too big of a difference for most pitchers.
Yeah, I think just on framing, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that good framing means like as little movement as possible, especially like with the glove. That's not the case at all. It's actually the opposite of that. There's a reason why catchers keep scooting closer and closer and closer to the batter. Framing is not about I'm going to catch this pitch and then like try to stick it in a way that the umpire is going to call it a strike, kind of like what you talked about. Really what it is can I go out and get that ball and kind of guide it back into the strike zone as it's coming in? That's closer to what they're actually trying to achieve here. So you see catchers kind of moving up. You see catchers actually going out and reaching for the ball because there actually is a lot of movement. It's more so like, how do we just make that movement look like it was all part of the flight of the pitch?
Yep.
So that it looks like it crossed the plate in the strike zone. That's really kind of what they're going for. It's not, let me catch this and then stick it. Because if you're catching it and then moving, yeah, of course it's going to look like it's a ton of movement. That pitch isn't getting called. It's, like I said, more about like we're actually moving with the pitch and kind of coming through the pitch in a way that is like going to match up with the spot he's throwing it to, the way it's moving, all this stuff, so that it looks like it crossed the plate in the strike zone. And if you're, dropping the glove and then kind of resetting a little bit, so to speak, that makes it easier to kind of. So sometimes if you need to come underneath the ball, kind of go that way. Like it just gives you more room to attack that pitch in whichever way you need to, so that you're kind of, like I said, like almost, so it looks like you're like pulling it so that it looks to the umpire like you're actually following that pitch like into the strike zone, kind of is more how it's working. I think that makes sense the way that I laid it out. But yeah,
we both said it different ways, so hopefully one of them makes some sense.
I hope so. But that's all that we have as far as MLB content goes. We can jump now into your minor league sandbox to close this week out.
Oh yeah. We got some good questions on the minor league sandbox this week as well. So Douglas asked us if there is any buzz around any prospects down in spring training, meaning, increased velocity, bat speed, size, etc. I will say the buzz has kind of been lacking so far in general. To be fair, actual minor league games only started about a week ago in spring. It hasn't been a huge schedule of those, but we haven't heard a ton. It's not something that obviously the local beat writers have a lot to cover on the major league side, so they don't have a ton of time to get over to the minor league side. And we haven't really gotten anything from Baseball America or Fangraphs. Any of those guys haven't really broken down the Brewers, at least. There has been stuff on other teams. They've been able to get to their camps, but we haven't seen much on the Brewers. I know the Pipeline guys did have a little bit of an article on some Brewers that were getting some attention, and I'll talk about one of the ones that they met, or two of them actually, that they had mentioned in that article. But I think the main one has been a name that I actually brought up probably the last couple of times, and that's Jack Hostetler, an undrafted free agent right-handed pitcher who just really has been getting a lot of love from including Jonathan Mayo during the spring breakout. He had pitched in that game. He talked about how he was getting some buzz as potentially like the Brett Witrowski of this year. So Witrowski was a day 3 pick, not an undrafted guy, but he was a day 3 pick who was relatively unknown and then just kind of exploded onto the scene in spring training and then ended up in Double-A last year. So he's kind of getting that kind of comp. He's got all 3 fastballs. He's got a slider and a changeup. Both of the secondaries looked pretty good. The fastball's got a ton of life on it. The 4-seam, very, very interesting arm. He was a D3 guy. He was committed to Oregon State as a transfer. He's probably the buzziest guy for the Brewers by quite a bit. But on the size front, there's a couple of things. I know Jesus Mate talked about adding some more good weight to his frame, packing on a little bit of muscle. So that's obviously a good thing. And then Luis Lara, who I've talked about a lot, I think he also added weight. You can see it. And I've seen him in a couple of the big league games and then in the spring breakout game as well. He looks the part. He's definitely put on some good weight. He might be in for a bit of a bounce back. It was not a great year for him. He was 19 years old the whole season. He'll be 20 this whole season. People may have, including myself, been expecting more than he should have been expected to give as a 19-year-old in high A, especially somebody his size. I mean, he's generously listed at 5'9", I believe. I would guess he's a little bit shorter than that, but he does look like he's in a pretty good spot physically right now. And he had a pretty good spring, especially when he's gotten into big league games. He's looked the part, and spring breakout game, he had a nice swing. He's a very good defender in center. He's very fast. He's a switch hitter. It's really all about the bat. So we will see where that goes. And then I think the other one that's gotten a little bit of buzz is Marco Dinges, a guy I talked about a little bit last time as well. He's been getting some love for his work as a catcher, which in the few times I've been able to see him catch, I saw him catch once at the end of the year in Carolina last year, and it looked like a guy who hadn't caught for a couple of years, which is what he was at that time. He looked pretty solid in the spring breakout game. I don't think he's at the point where you would be, comfortable throwing him into a big league game by any stretch, but he was catching Jacob Mizorowski in that game. And I thought there was maybe a little bit of like herky jerkiness to the way he was receiving. He was doing a pretty good job working around the ball and getting into the zone, and no pass balls or anything. I've had him at a pop time of 1.86 on one that I measured. I think another one at like 1.9. So it's not like an elite arm by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a decent arm. And the main thing for him is that the bat has always been the calling card. So if he can legitimately stick as a catcher, there's huge bat speed there. I think there's pretty big power in his future. So the news that seems to think he could be a catcher is very good. Murph even talked about him a little bit after the breakout game and talked about how much he liked him behind the dish. So that was very, very good to see. But yeah, those are probably the names I would list. Mason asked, I recently read that Brock Wilken may have less power than originally expected due to bat speed. Does that have any merit, or is he a guy that doesn't need to swing the bat at an elite speed to get to his power like Rhys Hoskins? So I would say I think there is a bit less power than I was expecting coming out of college, just raw power. The exit velos in Double-A last year were fine, but given his size and his home run production in college and stuff, I think they were a little lower than I was expecting. That said, there's still plenty of juice to hit quite a few home runs. And the other part of the equation is that he does pull the ball in the air quite a bit, which helps him get to that power. I actually think there are some Hoskins similarities here where because of the way he does hit the ball and he likes to pull the ball in the air with a bit of a longer swing, but still generate that power. Um, I think that is actually a decent comp for what he could be. There's a very interesting and somewhat mind-blowing story to me from Adam McCalvey this week. Wilkin got hit in the face last year. We've talked about that a number of times. One nugget in there was that Wilkin was told by doctors he was about a millimeter away from needing reconstructive surgery on his orbital bone. So it was pretty close to being like a major, major thing. Obviously, he avoided that. But Wilkin said in the article that my eyes were working in the 50th percentile in depth perception, which obviously is a pretty big deal for trying to hit a baseball. And he said my left eye was severely damaged, and the muscle that basically holds your eye in place was not strong enough. So basically, my eye could converge inward when I would try to focus on an object. He spent the entire offseason doing basically physical therapy for his eye. He was trying to strengthen his eyes. And I mean, that would explain some of the struggles he had last year. I'm not going to say it explains all of them or anything like that, but he dealt with a lot last year. And that in particular is kind of nuts. I mean, you lose your depth perception, which is a huge part of hitting. And then you have an eye that is meant to be focused on a baseball that's moving at an insane rate of speed every time, and it can't focus, and it's moving without you trying to move it. Like that could make things really difficult as a hitter. So this is going to be a big year for him. There's no doubt. But I guess this article gave me a little bit more hope for him that maybe there really was a big issue going on here. And now that he's hopefully back to seeing better, not maybe necessarily where he always used to be or whatever, but seeing better, maybe things fall back into place a little bit for him. And we kind of start to see the hitter we were hoping we would see after the draft. And then the last question comes from Tyler. He asks, as minor league assignments start coming out soon, which team or teams are you most excited to see on a regular basis? Also, how do you feel about a frozen pizza as a mascot? So the Timber Rattlers will be using a frozen pizza as their mascot for a certain amount of games this year. On that note, I am okay with every single different uniform, promotion, everything minor leaguers do or minor league teams do. I love that stuff. I think it's part of the fun of the minor leagues. You get a bunch of different jerseys. I know they always auction off the jerseys and stuff on timberrattlers.com, but I'm all for that type of stuff. I think it's fun. I think you get very funny pictures of like Aaron Ashby pitching in Lederhosen type of uniforms and all those types of things, which are very fun to look back on. But yeah, it's fun. I don't think it's not a big part of their season. I think they're only wearing it for like a series or two, but yeah, we'll see. I'll be very interested to see what they look like in an actual game setting. But on the topic of minor league assignments and what teams I'm going to be excited for, I do think Biloxi is going to be very fun this year. I'm expecting Pratt to be there. I'm expecting Luke Adams and probably one of Bovee or Wilkin, if not both. Just there should be quite a bit of talent, especially on the pitching side as well with Wachowski and other people. But for me, it's going to be Carolina. It's the first time you get eyes on a lot of players. Most likely it's going to be Jesus Mate pretty early in the season. I just like watching all of the new to the system players. Braylon Payne should start there. You'll see a lot of him. Eric Batanti will likely be back there. Just a lot of really, you get to see the teenagers, you get to see the new draftees. Early in the season, at least, Carolina is almost always going to be my pick because I haven't gotten to see a lot of those players. But I will say I think this is probably going to be the first year I can remember in a while where I would expect all four teams, including AAA, which is usually more of a like veteran-laden team where you don't have much to watch. I would expect all four teams to be pretty fun, at least to start the year. You'll have K-Row and guys like that in AAA. High A is still going to have a bunch of talent. It should be a fun viewing experience for all of the minor league nerds like myself. But yeah, we'll finish the sandbox here with my couple of underrated prospects, starting with Frandy LaFond. One, I just really like his swing. I think it's the type of swing that's catered to getting to pull side power. And he showed that. He only ended up with 133 plate appearances last year. In the DSL, he didn't start the season hurt, but he got hurt very early in the season. Came back, a little bit of a slow start after returning, but finished strong. Ended up with a 134 WRC plus. He pulls the ball 50% of the time. His ground ball rate was only 29%, and his line drive rate was 28%. He hit 3 homers. He stole 15 bases in 19 attempts. Very good athlete. He just kind of ticks off all the boxes that you're looking at when you look at DSL production. And then the little video I have gotten to see of him, I really do like the swing. And he was somebody that I was kind of tipped off to before the DSL last year, as somebody to watch, as somebody that maybe they had found on a pretty nice bargain in the international signing period. And then the other one is another international player from a couple of years ago, Tyler Rodriguez. For me, this is more of a personal favorite just based on the swing. It's just a really clean, short swing that seems kind of catered to the line drives. He actually doesn't have a very high line drive rate in the ACL last year, but he did hit a homer. 112 plate appearances. He had a 130 WRC plus. He was an 18-year-old playing stateside, so 30% above league average as a very young player. Shows some pretty solid defense in the infield. Interesting. I want to see some more power eventually come around. And again, he's another guy who pulls the ball in the air a lot. So you could see potential down the line if he can start posting a little bit bigger exit velos for some power to show up in games. But overall, higher walk rate than strikeout rate. Like he just showed a lot of good things as an 18-year-old in the ACL. It's going to be hard to kind of fit him into low A, but it also kind of feels like he might deserve to start there. So it'll be interesting to see where he starts the season. But that will wrap up the minor league sandbox. And I'm going to bring Jack back in here to wrap this up because, Jack, we are back to our long episodes. The season's coming up and we are back to our long episodes.
That's okay. I think that's kind of our MO a little bit. So back on the grind. Regular season is approaching. Opening day next Thursday. Thank you all for tuning in. Back just in time to recap all of the opening day action when the Brewers go to New York to face the Yankees. So talk to you then.